Now that we have a basic understanding of the importance of psychological resilience and the way in which our nervous system functions to take care of us during times of stress or threat, let's begin to explore how we can use this understanding to enhance our capacity for resilient humanitarian action. Please note, if you've missed the first module, please review the basic concepts by pausing this video and going back and watching the first recording in the series. Individual change is necessary, but not sufficient to support resilience. A trauma-informed lens can be applied upon multiple levels which interact with each other and together promote a resilient system. This approach is much more likely to support an organizational culture that promotes leadership way more than a single focus on any single level. For example, an individual can learn to observe and respond to their own distress and model self-care, which can actually inspire their colleagues and influence organizational culture. Managers and peers can learn to bring awareness of the emotional loading that they bring to each interpersonal communication and use tools to have the most resilient parts of themselves available in challenging interactions. Organizational policies and practices can be examined to provide scaffolding that allows individuals and teams the space and the safety to feel supported and access their own resilience, which in turn can further encourage a more flexible and thriving, larger organizational culture. So let's first examine how a trauma-informed lens promotes resilience on the individual level. We often hear this phrase, failing to prepare is preparing for failure, and the psychological realm is actually no different. What does psychological preparedness look like? It takes place in three main ways. One is reducing your baseline stress through regular and habitual self-care practices. Number two is knowing your common responses to stress and trauma so that you can both validate and understand your experiences and not think you're crazy, as well as discover when your reactions are indicating that you need increased self-care and coping. Number three is having a set of coping skills at your ready that you use regularly and that you practice so that you can take care of yourself and regulate as needed. Regular self-care in the forms of habitual activities that promote a sense of calm and safety can help your nervous system to return to the optimal arousal zone in the window of tolerance. These activities are typically ones that you already do and sometimes aren't actually anything special, but they're ones that you know are effective and are available to you. You can set an intention to engage in them more regularly. They can take many forms, but might involve investing in friends and community, engaging in more physical exercise, or connecting to a sense of purpose for your work. It's also essential to regularly practice being aware of your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, and your body sensations during times of stress so that you can start to identify your common patterns that suggest that you are experiencing various levels of stress, as well as your indicators that you are in distress or stuck outside of your window of tolerance and need additional care and coping. Also, because during periods of dysregulation, we have less access to our thinking parts of our brain, it's really helpful to write these things down so that we have access to them when we need them. For those of you who will be meeting with us in person in the intensive course, we will be using this type of self-knowledge to create a specific self-care plan. For those of you who are joining us online, we suggest that you take some time to reflect on your own signs of distress, your specific coping strategies that work for you, and write them down so that you can more easily access them as needed.
Resilience in practice on the interpersonal level involves the awareness that when you're working in humanitarian settings, many beneficiaries or peers or colleagues are going to have experienced significant stressors or traumatic events, which may cause them to be operating just at the edge or outside of their window of tolerance. Now, if you want to lead effectively and address adaptive leadership challenges that, by definition, are complex and involve multiple parties and perspectives and have high risk to them, it's beneficial to understand where people are at and to lead by helping people access their own resilience and be able to reconnect with their window of tolerance so they can be better partners, better beneficiaries, result in better work product in an area that's so important to all of us. Now, how do you do that? Well, Research on psychosocial interventions in humanitarian settings has found that there's a number of qualities that support emotional well-being. These same qualities allow us to access our own resilience and support resilience in others. And those qualities are promoting a sense of safety, creating opportunities for calming, promoting any sort of efficacy, whether it's individual or community, feeling as though you have an impact or you have capacity. Also, fostering connectedness between others and promoting a sense of hope. These qualities are what allow us to stay connected to ourselves and one another and regulated in that optimal window of functioning that we've talked about previously. And these qualities live in so many places, not only in mental health and psychosocial programming, but also in all of our day-to-day interactions with others. So this can be embodied in your work as a manager by creating a calm and safe environment for meetings, allowing folks, an opportunity to decompress before transitioning into other work. It also might take the form of just creating coffee breaks or a shared leisure activity for people on your team so they can connect with one another. Or it might be as simple as recognizing someone's hard work or expressing confidence that they're going to meet the goals that are set before them. In addition to doing all of these things, if you want to really commit to being able to lead with resilience, please consider being trained in psychological first aid. If these qualities appeared familiar to you, it's because they should be. They are cornerstones of psychological first aid that we use in humanitarian settings. There are many opportunities to engage in self-learning on psychological first aid. You can reference the WHO website for a manual on this important topic, and there are also a handful of organizations, including the US-based National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Studies, that offers open and free online courses on this topic.
In the interpersonal realm, there are many models of integrating emotional awareness and communication. But we find that the following model particularly is helpful in highlighting discrete steps to bring trauma-informed lens to challenging communications. Notice, regulate, connect, communicate. This model helps us to first notice, to leave the dance floor and go up to the balcony, as was discussed in the adaptive leadership module, and recognizes the emotional loading that both parties bring to a relational interaction through checking in with themselves, their bodies, their thoughts, their feelings, their actions, and also observing what we can in the other. It then reminds us to take time to regulate and return to our window of tolerance with coping skills, so we have access to our most resilient selves, and then we can invite our colleague to do the same or find ways of regulating together. We can then intentionally connect with ourselves and the other by truly listening and being present. Listening with the aim to understand and take in experience of the other, and not simply to react with our own assumptions and our emotional defaults. Finally, it promotes connection by making space for both parties to communicate their observations, their needs, their feelings, and requests in a way that makes this resilience bounce back from conflict much more possible.
As a community of practice, let's all continue to evolve and grow towards a fully trauma-informed approach that includes trauma-informed management at an organizational level. The trauma-informed approach seeks to support resilience by taking actions at the level of practice, programming, and policy. A trauma-informed organization would do the following. It would realize the prevalence of trauma in our humanitarian workplaces. It would also recognize the impact and signs of trauma among those we serve and those we work with. They would then respond by putting this knowledge into practice at multiple levels. And they would create policies that resist re-traumatization for folks and support resilience and recovery efforts. So as you grow in leadership or as a manager, please keep these 4 R's in mind. Realize that trauma is present in your work setting. Recognize the impact that it has on your work and those you work with. Respond by taking action to address the concerns associated with this experience, and resist re-traumatization and being part of the problem by actively supporting everyone's recovery. Let's take a moment to reflect on trauma-informed management or practice. For those of us working in the humanitarian field, trauma and resilience is so central to our work that almost always our work or organization is already utilizing at least some of the principles of trauma-informed practice. And also, this area is so important that we can all continue to grow and evolve and challenge ourselves to become more trauma-sensitive or trauma-informed.
What's one concrete example of a way in which your organization already uses the principles of trauma-informed practice?
Also, what is one recommendation you could make for yourself or your organization in order to be more trauma-informed? Are you aware of the prevalence of trauma among the folks that you work with? Are trauma reactions taken seriously when they show up among staff? Does your organization have a program or policy around supporting staff around critical events?
Does your organization pay particular attention to the gender balance on teams? Or does it prioritize collaboration?
And does your organization make safety a priority, both for men and women? It's been our pleasure to offer you this brief introduction to psychological resilience and humanitarian leadership. We hope during this brief time together, you've gained an understanding of what resilience is and its relevance for working in humanitarian settings. We also hope that you've gained a basic understanding of the building blocks of stress and the stress response so that you can recognize stress response in yourself and others and support yourself and those you work with.
Thank you for your time and attention. We look forward to meeting those of you who are joining us in person in a few months and also expanding on these topics.
For those of you who are continuing exclusively with the online course, we hope that this is just a jumping off point, and you'll continue to challenge yourself through self-learning on stress, trauma, and resilience. You can gain multiple resources on this topic by visiting mhpss.net, which stands for the Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Network. You can also access training on psychological first aid through the WHO website and various partner organizations for adult psychological first aid as well as for children. We'd also like to encourage you all, if you're not already familiar with the Interagency Standing Committee guidelines for mental health and psychosocial action, to visit those resources and become familiar with their guide for managers, as well as their checklists for each cluster or sector of work, such that you are able to prioritize resilience and wellness in the work that you're going to lead.